President Trump startled some lawmakers when he invited two top Democrats in Congress to the Oval Office yesterday and told them that he would shut down the government if he does not get funding for his promised border security. The president allowed cameras to capture a 17-minute argument with Senator Chuck Schumer and Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, who said that they won't give President Trump the funding that he wants.
In a tweet today, President Trump said, quote, the Democrats and President Obama gave Iran $150 billion and got nothing, but they can't give $5 billion for national security and a wall. The president, of course, is referring to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which released money that had been frozen by economic sanctions. We would need a good 10 or 15 minutes to unwind all that is not correct in that tweet. But let's first get to Weijia Jiang.
Where you have walls, Chuck, it's effective. Where you don't have walls, it is not effective.
Yeah.
Let's call a halt to this.
Public bickering over President Trump's proposed border wall ended with a defiant declaration in the Oval Office.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down.
The president made clear to Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi he is not budging on his mission to get funding for the wall in a spending bill. Mr. Trump wants $5 billion to build the wall, but they are urging him to support legislation that offers $1.3 billion for fencing and other security measures.
The experts say you can do border security without a wall, which is wasteful and doesn't solve the problem.
It totally solves the problem. And it's very important.
This has spiraled downward.
After the showdown, President Trump stood by his offer to own a partial government shutdown and downplayed the wild exchange.
Well, believe it or not, I think it was a very friendly meeting.
The Democrats had a different take.
This Trump shutdown, this temper tantrum that he seems to throw, will not get him his wall, and it'll hurt a lot of people.
In a private meeting back on Capitol Hill, Pelosi told colleagues, it goes to show you get into a tinkle contest with a skunk, you get tinkle all over you. And it's like a manhood thing for him, as if manhood could ever be associated with him, this wall thing. If Congress does not make a deal by December 21st, about a fourth of the government would close. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Magic things happen at Christmas, and that's what I'm counting on.
All right, so Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House. Weijia, it's in your story that the president called this meeting friendly. It didn't look friendly, but it looked spirited.
Everybody has their own definition of what that is.
At least they were talking. But look, we have a deadline. It's December 21st. So how does this set up negotiations leading to that deadline?
Yeah, well, friendly is just a word. It's just an adjective, and you can use anything you want to describe this, and none of that really matters, because what matters now is action and whether a compromise can be made. Now, Schumer and Pelosi have offered two alternative plans to President Trump to keep the government open with short-term funding. Of course, he's probably not going to get that entire $5 billion that he wants to build his wall. And apparently Pelosi said that after the meeting, President Trump called her up and they talked about ways forward, but he did not respond to these two very specific possibilities on the table. So we don't know what he's willing to do. And that's what matters here. Who is willing to give what? And it's not a lot of time, but as we heard, everyone seems to be a little bit hopeful. But this certainly was quite a way to set up negotiations. That being said, though, it's not out of the ordinary for President Trump to behave this way and really be tough when it comes to deal making. The difference is we got to see it, and we never get to see the sausage being made. And this was why it was so remarkable to have access. And it's something that the president welcomed. He wanted the cameras in there. He allowed it. And I think, he said as much. He said it's called transparency. Why not let the American people see how this is done? And there's a variety of reasons that, typically we don't get to see that. But this now really makes it an open window for where each side stands and where each side has to get to in order to prevent a shutdown.
You make a great point, Weijia. It's not often that we get to see this. It is transparent for the American people to see their government at work. But part of the reason we don't always get to see this is because when the president is dealing with members of Congress, especially members of Congress from the opposite party, things can get a little heated. And here what you saw is the president who, it seemed to me and to those of us that were watching, that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were surprised that the president was going to let cameras into that Oval Office meeting. But rather than those tight lip smiles that you've seen in the past with previous presidents and opposition party members in the Oval Office, they decided to push back. And one of the things that I remarked to Major when we were talking about it is I don't think we'd ever seen that kind of pushback with this president in front of a live camera.
Right. And I think each one of the people in that room had a motive and perhaps had a plan for going into that room. And perhaps the plan changed the course a little bit. But look, you have Chuck Schumer, who has been through this in January when there was a shutdown. And you'll remember that was nicknamed the Schumer shutdown because a lot of Democrats were upset with him that ultimately it was his side that caved after 3 days of a shutdown. You know, they were the ones that agreed on short-term funding rather than really stay on their ground to pursue the Republicans to come to a longer-term deal that weaved in protection for dreamers, so-called dreamers, those children who were brought to the U.S. illegally as children. And, you know, he had to shoulder the blame for that. So I think when Schumer walked in there, he made clear he wanted the president to own another shutdown if it were to happen again. He continued to bring up the fact that the president has called for one at least 20 times. He cited different media reports that called the president a liar and that, you know, called the president, that said the president wanted a shutdown in exchange for funding or for fighting for his border wall. And then you have Nancy Pelosi, who, remember, is vying to be House Speaker and wants to show her party that she can stand up to the president. So she wasn't going to stay silent once this all got rolling. And then you have President Trump, who wants to have someone to blame if the funding does not come through for his border wall, because it was such a huge promise of his that he was going to build this wall. And despite what he says, there's not been progress to build the wall as he sees it. And so this way, by putting it out there in public, he can say, you saw me try. I was tough with them. I told them what I wanted, and they're the ones that said no. So I think when you look at each of these people, it's clear why none of them were going to back down, especially once things got ramped up, except for Vice President Mike Pence.
It's funny you would bring him up. Speaking of shutdown. Wow. And I think that was the punchline for one of the late night talk show hosts. He certainly gave Twitter and the late night talk show host plenty to talk about because he just stayed out of that argument completely. It was like he was in another room, actually. But I'm really curious about what people are saying at the White House about him.
Well, officially, they're not saying anything because I do think that his performance spoke for itself. Even though he was silent the whole time, there's a lot to be read from that. And it is not atypical for a vice president to defer to his boss, especially in this case when it was very clear that the conflict was between President Trump and the two Democratic leaders. And what really could he contribute? I mean, it would have been awkward perhaps for him to jump in when President Trump was really driving this bus and later forced Nancy Pelosi to say, I tried to abort, and to get the cameras out of there so, we could stop this uncomfortable scene from playing out even more. But President Trump, again, I think wanted people to see that. And so, I think silence many times speaks volumes. In this case, it's one, and you can read his body language however you want. I don't think he was prepared for what happened because, again, here's 17 minutes of this showdown. He was going to be there the entire time. He knew he was going to, be there at least for the exchange of pleasantries, but I think was caught off guard when he realized what it had become.
Yeah, definitely. I think when Chuck Schumer sort of almost made fun of the president for his successes in Indiana, and then Mike Pence didn't say anything. He's from Indiana. Then I was like, oh, he's definitely trying to avoid making this worse or better or anything at all.
Exactly.
Right. Because if he was going to say something, that was a perfect opening.
Right.
But he didn't take it.
All right, Weijia, thank you so much.